everybody. We are going to talk more about the Social Security cost of living adjustment. It is coming up. It will be here before you know it, and we're just waiting on a little bit more data before we know for sure what it's going to be. Before we dive in, please take a minute and check out the link you see on your screen, fool.com/Frankel. Get a special message from my sponsor, The Motley Fool. It's the best way to support this work I am doing on YouTube. Again, fool.com/Frankel. So let's get right to it. I want to share my screen real quick. So let's get right to it. I won't bury the lead here. The most important date to keep an eye on for the cost of living adjustment next year is October 10th. So that's coming in just a few weeks. That day at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, is going to release September inflation data, or specifically CPI, or Consumer Price Index data. So that's the important thing, but let's talk about why that's important for the cost of living adjustment. So it all has to do with how the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is calculated. So the Social Security COLA, it doesn't depend on full year inflation, which a lot of people think it does. For example, a lot of people believe that the 2024 adjustment was based on inflation from all of 2023. That's not true. It only looks at third quarter inflation data specifically. So the Social Security Administration will look at CPIW, which is a specific kind of consumer price index. It's for urban wage earners and clerical workers, I believe is what the W means, from the third quarter of this year, and compare it to the same data from the third quarter of last year. The difference between the two will be how we determine what the cost of living adjustment will be. So here's what we know so far. We already have 2 months of CPI data to compare from the third quarter. We have July and August, which have already been released. They're released about, as you can see, about 10 days after the end of the month. This first column is July 2023 and July 2024. You can see the difference between those. That's the inflation that we've experienced. The middle column is August 2023 and August 2024. Pretty decent difference between those. And here's the blank part. This is September data. This is September 2023. We're waiting on September 2024. And then what will happen is the Social Security Administration will average these three numbers together, and then divide the two to determine the cost of living adjustment. So based on what we already know, the most likely cost of living adjustment is either going to be 2.5% or 2.6%, unless we get some kind of really big surprise. So for the most part, like I said, unless there's a big surprise, here's the cutoff. Just doing a quick calculation. If the CPIW data for September is more than 2.43% greater than last year's, that's the cutoff. If it's greater than that, we will get a 2.6% cost of living adjustment. If it's less than that, we will get a 2.5%. Of course, if it's a lot more or a lot less than that, it could be something totally different. But that's kind of the gist of it. So when does this go into effect? So this is often referred to, and I even did this in the title, is referred to as the 2025 cost of living adjustment. In reality, this is actually technically the 2024 cost of living adjustment, because it goes into effect with benefits for December 2024. However, since Social Security is paid a month in arrears, meaning you're getting paid for the previous month, it won't be reflected until your January 2025 payments, which is why this is often referred to as the 2025 cost of living adjustment. So assuming that there's not a really, really big surprise on October 10th when we get the latest data, you can see that this is going to be the smallest cost of living adjustment since 2020. Social Security recipients got 3.2% this year, 8.7% last year, and 5.9% the year before. It was only the 2020 cost of living adjustment that was 1.3%. That was the last time it was less than what it should be this time. And historically, the average cost of living adjustment is right around 3%. So this is lower than the historical average, but it is still an increase designed to help retirees keep up with the cost of living. So finally, let's think beyond. Of course, we don't know what inflation is going to do in 2025, 2026, etc. nobody knows for sure. The best we could do is project. After all, nobody at the start of 2022, no one thought that inflation would jump to a 40-year high that year, but it did. So there's a lot that we can't totally predict here. But the Federal Reserve, you probably heard that the Federal Reserve cut interest rates this past week. What they also did is every other Fed meeting, they release what are called their summary of economic projections, which include, among other things, projections for inflation. Now, this is a different type of inflation that the Fed is using. You may have heard, the Fed's preferred inflation metric. This is, it's a totally different type of inflation data than CPI, but it should be about the same. So looking forward, the cost of living adjustment in 2026, meaning the one that goes into effect with the payment you receive in January of 2026, will depend on 2025's third quarter inflation. The cost of living adjustment you get in 2027 will depend on 2026's third quarter inflation. So the Federal Reserve right now is projecting about 2.1% inflation in 2025 and 2% even in 2026 and 2027. Now, keep in mind, the reason that we had all these interest rate hikes that the Fed is just now starting to undo was to battle inflation. So it makes sense that the Federal Reserve they're not necessarily declaring victory just yet, but they know that inflation is a lot lower than it was, and they think it's going to continue to come down a little bit, and that is by design. That's why they were doing all this interest rate movement. So if those are true, that means inflation will be kind of tame. And of course, nobody knows for sure, but that is generally what the Federal Reserve is expecting right now. And if that's true, your cost of living adjustments should be roughly in that ballpark for the next few years. But of course, nobody knows, and we will have to wait and see. Please leave me any questions you have on this in the comments. I will do my best to answer any of them individually. I love talking about Social Security stuff, and I will be sure to do an update when we get the actual data on October 10th. Until then, thanks for watching. I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. The Motley Fool is a company that provides investing insight and stock recommendations for investors of all skill sets and risk levels. You all know how much I love researching new stocks and trying to find the next best investment. So I'm proud to partner with The Motley Fool to bring you 10 stock picks from the popular product Stock Advisor. Stock Advisor has beaten the market by nearly 5 times. So go to fool.com/Frankel to get your 10 stock picks now. The Motley Fool Stock Advisor returns are 767% as of July 5th, 2024, and are measured against the S&P 500 returns of 163% as of July 5th, 2024.